Good morning, live stream. Welcome to San Antonio Startup Week, Vsource Edition, Day 2. We are here this morning, and we would like you. Okay. All right. We would like you to sign up and let us know that you're watching online. So if you can scan the code and sign up, we would appreciate it. And I'm going to pause it for about 10 seconds and keep going. All right. Thank you to our sponsors. I want to thank Geekdom for donating the space that we're in today in this venue. I also want to thank the IBMF for this opportunity, and then the Port of San Antonio, the City of San Antonio, University Health, San Antonio River Authority, Brooks, and Veteran Social Summit. You're streaming via Veteran Social Summits Network. And so thank you, Ryan Hunt and Henry Bond, for doing this today. I also want to give a shout out to my team and then Lantias Thompson, who will be here later, and all that they're doing. So thank you for everyone who's been a part of this journey so far. Today, here's a quick agenda for today. We're going to start off with Patrick Flood from Owners and Honors. He's going to be talking about ETA. And then we're going to go to Veterans Franchise Advisors. We're going to talk a little bit about claims today. So if you are trying to do your claim, your VA claim, that would be a session for you. And then we're going to have a local veteran advocate here from Bexar County, Keith Wilson. So that will be our agenda for today. I'd like you to connect with us. Go on LinkedIn and sign up for Vsource SA. Supply SA is my job. So please go sign up. Let us know that you're out there. And if you have any questions, you can post there or on the live stream. So YouTube channel, if you have questions for Patrick later, make sure you post them in there and we'll get them to Patrick and have them answer, or for any speakers today. So now I'm going to introduce Patrick. So Patrick Flood, former Green Beret, Army Hua, and executive leader for many years in finance. And then he pivoted to starting and finding, and he founded Owners and Honors. So I'm excited to hear today about entrepreneurship through acquisition and what that looks like for the military community, or veteran community, more precisely. Yeah. So Patrick, take it over and teach us about ETA.
Thank you so much, and appreciate Vsource San Antonio for inviting us to the event. As was introduced, I'm Patrick Flood, the CEO and founder of Owners and Honor. Owners and Honor is a veteran nonprofit that's focused on creating a pathway for veterans, military spouses, and Gold Star family members to become acquisition entrepreneurs. So what is, really quickly, an entrepreneur who goes through acquisition? So there's really two main pathways and then sort of a sub pathway that is a way for you to be able to buy a business. So acquisition is just sort of the business school fancy term for buying a business or buying an existing property. In that, there's one way, which I think is going to be covered in the slides after mine, is going to be franchising. So why do people choose franchising versus an independent business? Typically, it's a little bit less risky. You understand the opportunity that is being presented for you. You have a lot of support from the franchisor to be able to then make sure that you have you're set up for success. And typically, we recommend franchise resale versus franchise expansion, mainly for the risk that's involved. Another way that's sort of the subway before we get into acquisition of an independent business is being able to go and work for a private equity firm or a middle market private equity firm or hold firm, something like Apex Service Partners. So Apex Service Partners has opportunities for general managers to come in, work within their franchise system, typically in service businesses. You don't get any equity, but you do learn how to run a profit and loss for a business. You're put on the spot. You get an ability to earn a decent living, and then a lot of your skills later on are directly transferable to buying an independent business. So the thing that we primarily focus on, although we do help people get to the other two places, is independent business acquisition. So our main purpose is to turn veterans and military spouses and Gold Star family members into owners. So why would you want to be an owner versus a W-2 employee? So one, there's nothing wrong with getting a job and being a W-2 employee first when you transition. Our goal is to make sure you have an ability to put food on the table after you transition. And then for us to really operate almost like an executive MBA, where then we help you get educated and then we help you look for it. But The benefits to being an owner is typically there's large financial benefits. If you buy a business that's well diligenced and you understand the growth opportunity in it, you're going to be able to end up having a wealth event when you actually do sell the business long term. Because instead of buying into, or instead of being an employee of a company and not getting equity in the company, you actually own it entirely at the end of the day. So you're creating an asset structure. So with that asset, you have something that you can sell later on. And then from that, there's part of our program that'll connect you to good exit planners, succession planning, to make sure that you have a good planned exit for on your way out, because that technically is one of the most expensive parts of running a business. The other reason that you maybe want to be an independent owner is to have a little bit more autonomy. So as an independent owner, a lot of us have worked within large bureaucracies for a long time. However, most of the military actually does give you a lot of autonomy within your role to be able to then be successful doing what it is that you want to do, and being quite entrepreneurial. And those of us who have been to combat know that combat, especially in combat support units, it's extraordinarily entrepreneurial. You have to figure out how to do more with less almost all the time. You have to work with people that are not necessarily considered convenient partners, but partners that happen to be in the situation to be able to help you be successful. The reason that spouses and Gold Star family members are eligible is that a lot of times the veteran himself or herself is focused on their own transition in a pretty big life event. It gives then the spouse or the Gold Star family member, who obviously should be benefited from the fact that their family member died in combat, to be able to then get an opportunity to change their life and, like I said, eventually have that wealth event. We're a national organization, so we're headquartered in Houston, Texas, but we do have opportunities all over the country. In that, this is our staff and our organization. So we have a pretty robust staff. We have 14 board members. We have an advisory support team. The support team that you get is that first you're going to come in, you're going to get educated to the program, and I'll go through that in a minute. And then once you're ready and you self-assess that you're ready to actually go search, and you finish the modules, then you get a search and acquisition director. That search and acquisition director is going to quarterback your search for a business. So are there other places that you could do self-funded searches and search on your own? You could use Biz by Sell, et cetera. The likelihood that you're going to be completely aware or have several instances of opportunity to be educated about how that works is generally low among the veteran community. So our goal is to be able to take that search and acquisition director who's had tens and dozens and dozens and dozens of opportunities to be able to help people. He's a former broker himself for 12 years, to be able to then look at opportunities, go through the letter of intent or the SIM that you get from the company, make sure that when you're getting diligence, you're getting a good opportunity, and helping you understand there's many different ways to look for a business. Then once you actually acquire the business, you're going to get a small business advisor and an executive coach. The executive coach is going to be focused on the veteran's transition and the whole family. So when you buy a family business, you are literally getting involved with your entire family. So it's important for you as a business owner to ensure that your spouse and your children understand that you're undertaking a new thing that's potentially going to impact your nights and weekends as well. In that executive coach is focused primarily on that, so that you understand that you have direct access to a community of people that are there to support you. The second person that you're going to get is a small business advisor. That small business advisor is really focused on the growth of your business. So they're going to be the ones working with you directly as the entrepreneur, making sure that you understand how you're reading a profit and loss, how you can create your marketing plan and your growth plan over time. And then they are then plugged into an advisory support network of several different companies that we've worked with that now can provide veteran discounts, free assessments, and then they are then brought in by that small business advisor to make sure that you have all the assets you need. What's interesting is the small business advisor and the search and acquisition director really focus on two of the different pitfalls that happen when veterans buy businesses. Number one is that they get a poor acquisition, so they don't know what they're looking at, potentially buy something too expensive or too risky, and then they have a really hard time running it in the first couple of years because it's all brand new to them. The second reason is that they have lack of experience. So it's normal that you're transitioning from the military, especially if you spent a couple decades in the military, that you don't necessarily have direct transferable skills or technical skills to be able to run the company. What's interesting, though, is that veterans have a skill that is very hard to develop outside of the military community, and that's leadership. So the fact that we are leaders, that the taxpayers spend millions of dollars on our education, and that we are then able to then outsize, mentor, educate, and create opportunity for people below us is one of the biggest things that differentiate us from other possible business owners. In that the second thing that ends up happening is that you have opportunity cost from being able to identify a problem, being able to bring in a vendor to be able to solve the problem, and then eventually being able to move on without the problem. Typically, post-acquisition, there's a period of lower revenue as you're adjusting to the business. And the more that you have experienced people around you, the likelihood that you're going to limit the loss of revenue during those first couple of years is high. The other people that you have here are the regional collaboratives and allied service providers that I already mentioned. So depending on where you are in the country, we'll connect you to that network of people that is near you to then be able to make sure that those allied service providers are ideally co-located with you. We have national allied service providers, but our goal is to really connect you to someone local, that if you need to be able to talk to somebody over a cup of coffee or breakfast, that you're able to do that. So over the opportunity. So what's the opportunity? So the opportunity, and the reason that we're talking about it, is that in the next 10 years, there's going to be about 6 million businesses that are going to be transitioning. So of those 6 million businesses that are transitioning, over 85% of them do not have a succession plan. That means approximately 4.5 million to 6 million businesses have no transition plan whatsoever. In that, there's an opportunity for us to be able to meet the need with prepared veterans to be able to go take advantage of that. In the process of it, though, we're not just meeting the need to take advantage of it for the veteran. We're also helping the business owner because we're helping them find a way to be able to get more money out of their business and ideally invest that back into their community. Most of these are small and community businesses. The typical loan size that we're looking at, or the way that we back it financially, is usually through an SBA 7A loan. The SBA 7A loan ranges from $500,000 to $5 million. In those businesses, that's a business that could typically have anywhere between 7 and about 35 employees, and has been running a lot of times for longer than 10 years. So in that, you're looking at being able to take a business from an existing owner, be able to mentor or take on their legacy, be able to steward their legacy, and then be able to differentiate yourself from other potential buyers in a way that says that you want to be able to take whatever that owner has done in that community and reinvest it back in that community. So the way that we do it is we obviously provide tools to be able to help you do that. One of the main tools that we do it is through the education program. So the education program is a 6-phase program that really goes throughout your entire entity, your entire opportunity as an owner. So the first 2 stages happen prior to you actually going and looking. The other 4 stages end up focusing on the education that you need while you're an owner. When you start out, so typically what you do is you go through these pathway right here. You can, if you already have experience as a business owner, or you've been in the environment and you've been running someone's profit and loss for a long time, you've been a CFO, COO at a different company, there's ways that we will interview you and then determine whether or not you need all the parts of the program. But really, when you walk through it, if you look at all the different parts of phase 1, which is intelligence and reconnaissance, also called the Values Base Camp, you're going to walk through learning what ETA is. Then you're going to understand your financial preparedness. There's several different functions to that, one of which is understanding an SBA loan. Another one is certified financial planning for acquisition. And another one is to ensure you have your VA benefits. And I think someone later today is going to be talking about making sure you have your VA benefits. Diligence, so helping you understand the language of diligence. What does a SIM look like? What does an LOI look like? What does risk look like? And also what comes from risk is a lot of times opportunity during the diligence. And then the different pathways to acquisition, which we already covered. Going to stage 2, that's the planning portion of it. So from that, you're going to go through a buy box exercise. It's going to talk about your geography, your timeline, the amount of money that you actually need to make, and then your long-term vision for the company. So most loans, 7A loans, extend to about 10 years. So our goal is for you to create an exit plan that's going to be about 10 years from your acquisition. Does that mean that you have to exercise that exit plan? Absolutely not. But it does mean it gives you a horizon to be able to do some backwards planning on, to understand, does the 10-year operation of the business and exit meet your financial needs for you and your family? So that's part of the reason you go through that certified financial planning for acquisition. And then you do the pass the guide on part, which is really the pre-mission training, which is a week-long exercise to make sure that all of the different courses you've gone through are top of mind, so that then when you enter the marketplace, you're actually ready to go. Phase 3 is when you actually start searching. So phase 3 is what we're really doing the first 2 phases to prepare you for. So in the market right now, if you take your average business, and there's a couple people in the audience, so you take your average business, it goes to sale, and it ends up getting listed by a broker. The day that it gets listed by a broker, there are sometimes up to 60 to 100 inquiries about that business. Do you have to worry about that? Not necessarily. So a lot of those inquiries are done through AI-generated engines of people just looking to acquire for businesses that are being listed. They're not even serious about buying it. A lot of times it's them trying to scrape a ton of data to be able to see what's available to then be able to contact the owner. What's interesting about that process is that it's burning out a lot of owners that want to sell their business in as smooth a way as possible and make sure that they know the person buying their business and know that they're turning over this legacy business that they've taken care of and all their employees to someone who cares about it. That's where we come in. So as veterans, what's interesting is that we have a differentiating effect because we over-index on human capital. We care about people. We are used to taking the legacy from someone else and making it slightly better. And we're used to being able to taking all of that legacy and understanding what's the motivation of the person who ran the business to begin with. If they weren't selling the business, what would they be doing anyway? If they have been part of the community, how long have they been part of that community? And what is their investment strategy in the community? Most small businesses give up to 10% of their income, and there's a lot of tax advantage to that, to the local community. If you are a person or an entity that's scraping tons of data to try to figure all that stuff out, find the diamonds in the rough and then be able to approach them, that is way different than us being able to connect you directly with that seller and then you having a conversation human to human to be able to then understand that there's a big differentiating effect to a veteran who actually wants to steward your legacy. Phase 4, so that's after you acquire it, and that's when you get that executive coach and the small business advisor. And then phase 4 usually goes up to about 3 years, and that's during that phase where the growth is really critical and minimizing revenue loss is super critical. And so that's almost weekly engagements, making sure that you're growing at a good, consistent rate and that you're utilizing all the resources that are required, and we're identifying problems early to be able to solve them. Phase 5 and 6. So phase 5 is where now it's really steady state. So you have less engagements with us. You have the opportunity at that point to disengage entirely at year 5, to say, hey, I would like to be able to, I think I could do it on my own now. I would like to be able to then leave Owners in Honor in the circle of the advisory services, but you, at the end of the day, you're still going to become part of our network, and then you'll be a mentor later on. And then phase 6 is when you're decided that you want to sell. So our goal for phase 6 in succession planning is that you identify it ideally 3 to 5 years from the time that you actually want to have that horizon event. The reason for that is it sometimes takes 3 to 5 years to be able to get your books ready, to be able to then make sure you have the highest valuation possible. So when you do sell the company, you get the most out of it. So the goal for this is to be able to help you understand the opportunity that's laid out. The way that our program works specifically, and it's a question that comes up quite a bit. Let me see. It's a question that comes up quite a bit is, what do we get out of it, or why are we doing it? So we are a nonprofit. It's a typical 501c3 that does charitable events and donations, and that's the main way that we fuel the business, fuel our ability to be able to advise people. The other way that we do it is that during the acquisition itself, the seller has a big tax benefit for conveying common shares of the company or a small portion of the company to Owners in Honor. What's interesting about that is that then we become minority owners, which gives us a vested interest in growing the business, but it also gives us the ability to then minimize the amount of investment from the veteran because some of that is already taken off the table. The way that the contract works then is that we are able to then give it back to you, that amount of equity later on at as early as year 5 at the cost of the initial sale plus some administrative costs, anywhere between 3 and 5% depending on inflation. So what ends up happening is that you are essentially getting, it is not a debt function, but it is something very similar to a debt function where now you've minimized your risk and you've minimized your exposure while ensuring that the advisors that you're going to get are part of what you're going to do until you've decided yourself that that's enough. Once you've decided it's enough and you don't want to do that anymore, then you can buy that equity back, and then everything ends up being that you have essentially gotten a very low interest rate loan for a very long period of time. Your typical 7A loan is anywhere between 9 and 11%, I think, right now. And so when you're getting a loan that's really 3 to 5%, it's much, much, much lower than a typical loan or the value of capital, even though it's not really a debt. With that, here's how you can contact us. The other way that you can contact us, if you can't actually capture this online, is be able to go to www.ownersinhonor.org, or you can contact myself, Patrick Michael Flood, at LinkedIn, and be able to contact us for more information. The way that the program works is if you're interested, you're going to go to the Buyers tab on our website. On the Buyers tab, you're going to click on it. There's going to be a form you're going to fill out. That's going to generate an interview. That interview is then going to bring you into the program, and you're going to be put into a cohort that's going to help you understand how everything's laid out. From that point on, it's really self-timed. That being said,
Patrick, we have some questions.
There's some questions.
Yes, there are questions.
Yeah.
What is the timeline from start of the process? Let's assume I'm interested.
Sure.
And I get with your team. What's the time from start to getting the key and actually operating in the business?
Yeah. So the classic answer, even though I'm not an attorney, it depends. So national average for acquisition of a business, a small business, is 22 months. So say for instance, you've gone through all of the initial parts of it, and then you've decided, yeah, I want to look for a business. It may take you up to 22 months, or an average of 22 months, to be able to find a business. With our program, with our robust network of brokers that are all over the country, the likelihood that we're going to be able to shorten that is pretty high. The other portion of it, which is really the education portion of it, that's all self-timed. So it really depends on how quickly you can go and pass out of the different modules, so that we know that you're prepared to then go out to market and actually be able to buy a business. What we want to be able to do, and the thing that brokers have asked us to be able to prepare, is to prepare a capital-ready buyer, so that by the time they go out to market, if there's an opportunity, they can connect them with the seller immediately. And then acquisition, once you actually engage and you start going back and forth with offers and you actually do a final offer, it's usually anywhere between 45 and 90 days. So, but it depends. Like, obviously, the cleaner it is, or the more straightforward, the more ready the veteran is to be able to buy the business, the more likely it is to be able to have really profitable or positive negotiations, in which case then you want to close it. Because a lot of times the owner wants to sell it as fast as possible. He just doesn't want to sacrifice a lot of value in his business by trying to find somebody who's maybe getting a loan or something else instead of providing cash. The way that we are helping that is that we have something called a buyer's bulletin, that we have a network of brokers all over the country, and we're preparing that buyer's bulletin, which are all of our searchers that are looking right now that are prepared and capital ready. We're getting it in front of brokers ahead of time. So brokers are getting it every month, so they know that there are veterans within their community that are looking for businesses. So instead of us waiting, just like everybody else, for something to get listed, we're actually first in line.
I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
What does a capital-ready buyer look like? What are some of the requirements where you're saying this is a make or break it?
So there's a couple different parts that are components of that. One is completing the personal financial data sheet that's on the SBA's website. That helps. In that, you're going to provide things like what's your credit rating, because that's going to change. And then for us to understand what's called a thesis, or your buy box thesis, or your investment thesis, is to say, what kind of business are you looking for? What is your transferable skills? And then connecting you to a bank. Because so this is something that's, I think, less known than it needs to be. Every bank has a different credit thesis about how they lend money. So there are certain banks that have red line issues that won't lend money to you based on a certain type of business. When you apply to that bank, you have no idea why you got rejected typically. You just get a rejection letter. So for us, we're connected to 3 large national lenders. So First Internet Bank, Huntington Bank, and Live Oak Bank. We're also connected to about 22 regional lenders that all have different credit theses. And what we do is, when you do that buy box exercise, we introduce you to those lenders, and then those lenders will be able to give you a note, so that when you're going to market, you're already basically pre-approved. There's no such thing really in the market as a pre-approved for an SBA loan, but you're essentially pre-approved because you have a letter from a bank saying that they would guarantee a certain amount of money based on your investment thesis.
I have another question for you. When you're looking at starting the business, the return on your investment. At what year do you expect someone to break even about on average? And at what year do you think they need to be profitable?
Yes, that depends. So it depends on a lot of stuff. So like, as an example, I can give you 2 case studies. So, and each of the owners did it a different way. It all depends on the owner. So one, typically what ends up happening after you purchase a business is that there's a revenue lull. So, and you're having to deal with a couple of different things on sort of the L and your profit and loss. One is you have debt service. So depending on the size of the loan you have, the interest rate of the loan you have, and the terms of the loan you have to be able to pay the loan first before you pay anybody. Then you have to consider, did I lose revenue during this transaction because I lost customers, I lost marketing, I lost whatever. And then you have to be able to look at it and figure out how to mitigate that. The other part is that the person who was running the business before had something called seller's discretionary earnings or free cash flow. They call it 2 different things. And that's the discretionary money after all those other expenses that then the seller ended up paying themselves. So it depends on the size of business sometimes. So one example, $5 million acquisition, the seller had been paying themselves $700,000 a year because they had paid off all their debt. So they didn't have any debt service at all. And when I say pay themselves, it was really them, a general manager, and a chief operating officer. So between them split $700,000, plus they kept money in cash reserve. So the owner, when he came in, the brand new guy had a big debt service because he ended up taking up about 70% of that with debt, which is fine because his business is growing right now, great. And then he looks like he's going to be able to pay it off in 5 years instead of 10. Because when you really make the money is once you pay off your loan. That's when you make really, really good money. So for him, he chose to take his disability and his pension and be able to just live on that. And so he lives on his disability and pension and supplements a little bit from the business. But because of that, he's able to pay off his loan probably 5 years earlier than he would have, which is then going to make him extraordinarily profitable. Even based on the way that he's doing that, his valuation as a business already went up. So that $5 million business is already valued at almost $7 million, just based on the way that he wants to be able to pay himself or invest in the business. So really simple to be able to create a higher value business so that should he want to sell it to somebody else, whatever. In the meantime, because of his reputation, because he's a veteran, worked with the people that are with the company, didn't fire anyone, really looked at opportunities to be able to grow people in the company, 2 other competitors in the market who are both in their 60s have asked him to buy their companies. So right now he's having a great problem, which is he's looking for more capital to be able to buy both of those companies, which is great. It's a great problem to have. The other person determined that they're buying an accounting company. And in that accounting company, that's about $350,000 to $375,000 company. Again, no debt. And so she's going to have to take out a loan, be able to pay for the company. She wants to be able to make about $75,000 a year. So she just has to carve out that $75,000 a year, which then gives her a little bit of buffer between her debt service and then the rest of the money available. So that ends up becoming her free capital that's available in the company, or liquid capital. That then, if she wants to grow the company, invest, do a capital investment, or do whatever she wants in the company, she can. But the goal is to be able to not string yourself out so that you can't afford your bills, which is why if you go all the way back to the beginning, it's certified financial planning for acquisition, super important. So you understand, and there is, not that I'm aware of, but there's no like universal financial literacy classes for veterans when they're transitioning, or family members for that matter. And so a lot of times people have misconceptions or misperceptions about, like, once you're a business owner, your tax structure is way different. So your ability to pay yourself and pay less taxes is much higher. So if you're earning $200,000 a year and currently you're paying almost 30% in taxes as from a business. And so because it ends up being corporate tax and payroll tax instead. So there's different ways that you're actually able to leverage it to be able to make sure you're paid earlier. The goal, though, is for us to be able to meet you where you need, not to necessarily say every instance is going to be you're going to get return on capital in 3 years. The general rule of business acquisition that's a good acquisition is that you're at least flat, your revenue flat, so you're able to pay everyone, but maybe the revenue is not growing at that point in year 3. And that's really the measure of success. And that's why they say 2 out of every 3 business acquisitions isn't successful at year 3 because they haven't grown at all. So they purchase the business, but then they flatten out. With the business advisor and with the correct acquisition, the goal is for us to flatten that J curve, it's called. So the dip in revenue that happens, and those are primarily because of 2 reasons: poor acquisition and then lack of experience. Is that a way too complicated answer for your question?
No. Are you ready for another one?
Sure. Have at it.
So each business, the business owner has to have skin in the game.
Yep.
When you look at ETAs, what is the skin in the game that you say at a minimum somebody needs to have? And I'm sure it depends on the business.
Yeah.
But when would you turn someone away because you're just thinking they may not have the skin in the game?
Yeah.
You know, the dollars to do so, the finances, or can you expound a little bit of what that may look like?
Sure. So because they're a local person and they talk about this quite a bit, I can talk to you about one of the extremes that sometimes gets people interested in ETA that don't realize that they need to have some skin in the game. One of the extremes that is sometimes talked about is that I can go into it, maybe get a small SBA loan. A veteran only has to have 20% or 10% collateral instead of 20% collateral for an SBA loan, which is great because we get a waiver. But in that, there's still closing costs. There's still other costs that are just like if you're buying a house that are part of it. And those could be anywhere between 1% and 2% of the value of the business, depending on how big the business is. And then there's broker costs that are usually transferred by the seller, usually not the buyer, but it gets baked in typically to the deal and you split them. And then you can also do seller financing. That's what's talked about all the time, is this magical world where a seller is going to completely finance their business to you. It's a perfect thing when it does happen, and it does sometimes happen. It's not as rare, or it's not as common as it's sometimes talked about, because it really is sort of the ideal, is that the person stays in the company, they seller finance, and then you get a small SBA loan. And then from that, you're able to pay off the SBA loan right away, and then you're able to pay off the seller. And then in the meantime, the seller, it's a great deal for the seller because the seller, quite frankly, makes a lot more money on the sale of his business than they do otherwise. And there's a lot of tax advantages to it. However, because 85% of people aren't ready to sell a business, when they are ready to sell a business, they're ready to get out. So a lot of them don't want to do seller financing because they don't want to get stuck in the business still. And they don't want to have the risk of having their capital tied up into a business that could potentially be foreclosed. So, and they don't want it to be a 40-hour-a-week job like it used to be. So what typically we say is that a veteran needs that. So there's different ways to do it, but ideally a credit rating above 650, because otherwise you're getting a really high interest rate of your SBA loan. And then need to have about 10% of the capital to be able to put down. There's a lot of different ways to be able to do that. You convert your TSP. In Texas, you can't use collateral in your house, but in other places you can use equity in your house. There are some places that say, hey, why would you do that? It's super risky. At the end of the day, it's all about managing your risk. So it's not about not taking any risk. We liken it a lot of times to jumping out of airplanes. So ultimately, capitalism is risky. It's inherently risky. Gravity, also very risky. And all we can do is mitigate it. So what you want to be able to do is make an informed decision, mitigate risk down to an acceptable level, and then be very informed about the risk that you're taking so that you understand what it is that you're doing. It's not that different than if you're doing a startup and you're bootstrapping it and you're trying to figure out, is it market ready? What's the market saturation? What's the customer need? Et cetera, et cetera. The nice thing about it is that you have ideally 3 or more years of data from that company. So you can generally project what the growth of the company should be. And then when you can get back to even and ideally reinvest all that stuff back in yourself. At the end of the day, the reason you did a TSP or a 401k is because you wanted to have retirement planning. So if you're able to build an asset that is much more valuable than a TSP account, it ends up being a trade-off, but it's a trade-off that comes with risk.
Are you ready for one last
Ready.
question?
More.
If you were to give advice to me, and I'm interested in ETA,
what
are some of the things you would say? Three things that you say, make sure you do that, or 3 things, make sure you do not do those.
Yeah, so first off, I would say, what's the main reason? So that I didn't talk a little bit about the third reason that businesses aren't profitable in the first 3 years after acquisition. The third reason is personal issues. So the number one reason for emergency recapitalization or foreclosures on SBA loans is divorce. So if you are going into this without talking to your family members, without talking to your spouse, you're making a big mistake. And so being able to bring in your family, making sure the whole family's involved in the decision is super important. We invite the family members to all of the different modules to make sure everyone's understanding the risk that they're taking in, because ultimately it's a family risk. So number one, know yourself. Secondly, we recommend, and it depends, some people can get a waiver for it, but we recommend 100% of the people who go through our program go through another veteran transition program. And I can name about 5. And so whether that's 4Block, Next Stop, the Honor Foundation, SOTA, Commit, go through one of those, because they're going to help you pin down what it is that actually motivates you. And it may not be something like buying a business right after getting out of the military. It may be so similar to myself. So I got out of the military, went to business school, good business school, then got involved in finance. I don't think psychologically I was prepared at that point to buy a business. And so it took me about 3 years to get my feet underneath me, deal with the transition, understand my own capital, raise some money, put some money aside to be able to say, okay, now I've taken 3 years of doing something that maybe isn't my passion, but it's something that I know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And eventually I'm investing for something that's going to be my passion. And so it gives you a lot of time then to be able to build it up. A lot of the people in our program right now, we have 301 people in the education program and 16 people actively searching. Of those 301 people, the majority right now are people that have been out for 18 months or longer, who then decided that that wasn't the thing that they wanted to do for the rest of their life, or they weren't feeling fulfilled. And this is a great way for you to pivot at that point in your life and be able to find a pathway to purpose. But ultimately it's about, you determining yourself, making sure you're in a community of support for transition, so you're narrowing it down to this. And then the last part of it is to really start thinking about the future. And it's hard for all of us, because essentially you're planning for an impending doom, but it's being able to say, what is it that I want to do 10 years from now, and be realistic about it. So one of the things that we want people to do when they're involved in entrepreneurship through acquisition, and other people that will coach differently, but our goal is to be able to get you back to where you want to live. Most transition organizations say, and I used to be one of the people who coached in them, is to say, when you go to market, understand your market value, because when you get hired by a company, you're going to get anchored at that salary forever. So understand your value to the market, make sure you're able to go where the job is going to hire you, and then be able to go to that money. And then later on, you can sort of switch to something that you want to do. Ideally, if it's in a big company, like a Big Four sort of company or whatever. What's interesting about that, though, is that a lot of times you create psychological dissonance between you and your community, and it becomes hard. The transition becomes harder than it needs to be. So one of the ways to mitigate that is to move back to where you want to move, where you or your family want to move. So that could be, hey, we had a great posting in Anchorage, Alaska, or Hawaii, or whatever, and we think that's our forever home. In business acquisition, that's a great asset for us to be able to have, is that information, because our likelihood of being able to find a business where you actually want to go goes up exponentially versus you saying, hey, I'd like to be able to earn $200,000 a year anywhere in the country. So it's like saying, hey, I want to buy a house, somewhere. And, the ability to contact real estate agents, be able to find properties, it just becomes magnificent. And so the goal is to be able to say, okay, if you want to move to San Antonio, then let's start looking at San Antonio maybe plus an hour. If you want to move to Houston, then that's great. Let's look at Houston plus an hour. If you're fine with the entire triangle, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, then great, then we'll look within that area. And it gives us the ability to then talk to a broker who's in that area and say, look, we know exactly what we're looking for. And that goes back to the geography. So the other big conversation that I think is sometimes last on the list of things that you're talking about during your transition with your family is, where do you want to live? Because more often than not, it's like, where is the job going to hire us? And what's great about that, I think, and a lot of the people that have been through our program think, is that then if you go into defense contracting and maybe you feel like you're kind of giving up because it's something too close to what you used to be doing in the military, and now you're not following your dream, it gives you time to be able to do that and be able to do it well and not have, sad face while you're doing it for 3 years, because that something else is in the horizon. One of the veterans that were in our program got a job at a water purification company in Houston. And that person said, hey, I just don't know what to do. I don't know what I want to buy, et cetera. Now, but I also, I got this great job offer and I think I should do it, but I'm not sure if it's going to put me on the right path. When you go through coaching and counseling, he realized that within the company that they had 230 subcontractors of which 70% were age 60 or older. And now he has a great opportunity to start connecting with those companies that are within the company that hired him, to then be able to help, one, solve the problem for the big company that hired him, and then two, be able to solve a problem for that exiting business owner, all because he didn't say, hey, this is just temporary, I'm not going to make any human connections, but being able to say, hey, this is my long-term goal, and then start letting people know about it, but still doing the work, which is essentially, those are the really three things.
I have another question, but before I have another question, does anybody have a question, Patrick? Okay. You do.
So you talked a lot about veterans who are already out and have already been kind of working something else and now are looking at a pivot.
Sure.
And that was kind of the majority. So myself, still active, looking at that transition. So is it realistic to be looking at going through this education program while still active, so there's a kind of an easy off ramp when it comes time for that? With that, does any of this kind of tie into the Skill Bridge program?
So none of it currently ties into Skill Bridge. That's a different discussion. However, yes, you're right. So getting involved in this ahead of time. So that first acquisition, the $5 million acquisition, that was an active duty guy who was 6 months out, got involved in our program, and was like, hey, I know for a fact where I want to live. I know generally what I want to do. I have this much money saved. We lined him up with a bank right away, and then we could start looking. And we found it's a bit of a Pegasus unicorn, but we found a business within the first 40 days, and then we closed on it in the next 60. So within 100 days, he was a business owner of a very big company. It can happen. It doesn't always happen. But if you set up all those three questions that we just talked about, and we would recommend concurrently then going through a transition organization, most of which allow you to start about 18 months to 24 months out, to be able to start having those bigger conversations of what's my why, what's my motivation, who am I, like, why do I want to do it, why do I want to own a business? Because it'll create a better story for you when you're dealing with your buy side sheet and approaching someone, if you know what your values, passion, and character are, and what differentiates you from another potential buyer. Because if you understand that, and those transition programs are great for that, we'll help refine it, but those other programs are going to really start with the macro and get to the micro. And all of that stuff is then also great because they're a great community here. And if you stay in the San Antonio area, which I know that you said that you wanted to, it's great because there's a big, vibrant veteran community here. Other people who transition to other places, like there's a gentleman who wants to transition to Knoxville. So Knoxville, not a gigantic veteran community, but that's where his spouse's family's from. So great, but needed to go through that transition organization to have that sort of virtual military community, so he wasn't completely disconnected from other veterans during the transition process. But yeah, but ultimately, anybody can start at any time. There's no timeout. That's another good question. So once you're involved in the program, is it an accelerator like some things talk about? Like, hey, you got to complete it in 8 weeks, 6 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever. Negative. So ultimately, all of these are modules. They're all done in a row. They all build upon one another. And then when they build on each other, then you're going to have all that stuff ready. And it's not just, hey, this is great education, now I'm going to stick it in my back pocket and whatever. All of that stuff builds to you getting a loan from a bank. So all of the documentation and all the education and all the work and all the other stuff that you're doing there is going to help you get a loan from a bank. So it's all collaborative, so that we make sure that it ends up, we're not wasting your time and you're not wasting the bank's time. And then from that, like, we would recommend people as early as 2 years out to start getting the education. The more educated you are, the better. There's going to be some things that change every year. The SBA 7A loan changes every year. SBA changes the rules. There's some stuff like a great example of something that just came up this year is that now veteran certificates that are tied to a specific business cannot be transferred to somebody else who is not able to have those certificates. And now, starting January 2026, veteran-owned businesses are going to be much more motivated to sell it to a veteran versus someone else, because they're going to get a higher valuation for the business. So like, that was a brand new rule change that happened about 3 weeks ago. So all of that stuff, and you're in the network. While you're taking this, you're still in the network. You're still going to group coaching sessions, webinars, to be able to make sure that you're still getting hot. And then ideally, we understand what your timeline is to actually look. And we'll start actively searching probably about 3 months before you're out. But if we already have all that data, it shortens the time frame a lot, because we're going to be able to get your possibility of an acquisition out in front of brokers 90 days before you're even out.
I have another question.
Yes.
So you talked about education. I'm somehow interested, maybe just contemplating. Do I come to you, owners and honors, and saying, hey, I'm interested, and do you guys put us through education?
Yep.
Or would you say only if you're truly interested, you know this is the route you want to go, we want to talk to you? What is the right approach?
Yeah, so
contacting you?
what you're talking about is funnel size. So like marketing funnel size. At the end of the day, our first half of the program, the first phase, is enormous. So you could have, if you're interested, you're tangentially interested, you just want to know about it, that's fine. Because at the end of the day, it's great education for you to have. Even if you're not going to do it for right now, you're going to do it 5 years from now. And you're also going to understand a little bit more about it. It may equip you enough that you feel confident enough to even do it on your own, which is also fine. Our goal is to try to mitigate risk as much as possible. That's why you work with us. There are people that do this every day without any help at all. They sort of freestyle, and the outcomes are, about 30% of them are profitable and 70% are not. Our goal is to, with our program, mitigate it all the way down to less than 10% are not profitable in the first 3 years. And if it works the way that it looks like the thesis will work out, they all should be profitable. And really that has a lot to do with the constituency of veterans. It also has to do with the way the program works as far as additive education over time. And then to otherwise answer your question is that when the rubber really hits the road is when you're at this back here and you do your buy box exercise. That's when you say, hey, I've gone through this education program for 3 months, 6 months, 18 months, whatever. And now I'm ready to go. I'm going to do this exercise. We evaluate the exercise, give you a thumbs up or thumbs down. No, you're not ready to go, or yes, you are ready to go. At which point then you're launching. So all of the beginning part, we could potentially have 10,000 people in the first part, all getting educated about it. Part of the reason that we're doing that is that there's a lot of veterans that don't realize that they have the perfect attributes to be able to do this. And some of the existing programs right now are set up as accelerators. So you start the program at day 1, and at day 21, you're done. And you're not really added to a network. You're not added to continual education. The education is all, timed, and it's not done, all of us, what we work to time or to standard. So the goal is to really train to standard, not to time. So is that as you go through all this stuff, if it takes 3 times to get through one of the modules because maybe your credit's too low, maybe you don't really have an understanding of what you want to do 10 years from now, maybe you don't have a good financial plan, maybe you don't have the documents you need to, then do it again. And eventually the goal is that by the time you've gone all through those things a bunch of times, that there will be no difference between you and a person who did it one time and did it all through the first time. The broker is not going to be able to tell the difference. One more. I'm ready.
One more. Just one more. I have 2 more. Okay.
Sure. 2 more.
One of you mentioned earlier that in the next few years, there's going to be a exponential growth of business sellers,
Yep.
business owners that want to sell. Does that kind of like in the mortgage space become then a buyer's market versus a seller's market, or is the market condition, it doesn't affect this business model?
Again, it depends. So I would generally say it's still going to be a seller's market, but it's going to be a prepared seller's market. So sellers that have done a really good job in preparing, and that's something we don't talk about quite as much because this is really sort of about transition. But we also have a platform that helps veterans that are owners to be able to do succession and exit planning to make sure they get the highest valuation possible, because they actually overrepresent in that 85% of people that don't have an exit plan. And so for us, we want to make sure the veterans have a good way to get out. The issue is that technology is now enabling people that see the opportunity. And there've been a couple books, there's a couple different web platforms of different people that are teaching it that have added a whole bunch of competition to the market as far as buyers. But I would say 90%, the estimate for like Trans World is that 90% of those buyers aren't quote unquote real. So they're not really ready. They're not capital ready, really. They're not really understanding the acquisition. They're not really understanding the timeline, but they're out there hitting up people because there's no filter for that at all. So there are some AI engines that some universities actually talk about that people then sign up to that are sometimes sending out 100 or 300 letters of intent a week to people. And so the sellers right now are having a hard time discriminating who's real versus who's not real. And if you're desperate enough as a seller because you haven't, and that's a bad way to say it maybe, but if your timeline is too short as a seller to be able to get your capital out of the company, the likelihood that you're going to take on any offer that seems reasonable and cash is going to be high. So that's the other part of the program we don't talk quite as much about is veteran owners and making sure that they don't feel that crunch to sell, because when you get a crunch to sell, you lose a lot of money, or you end up selling it to somebody that's not a good steward of your business, because all you're worried about is getting the cash for the business at that point. More often than not, business owners do not just want the cash. They want someone to know that they're going to take care of the community and their employees. When it comes down to just the cash, it's because their timeline is so short and they just want to be able to get out of it because it's become a stress. So yeah, so to answer your question, the market is probably supply is going to meet demand. There's going to be a whole bunch of buyers, a whole bunch of sellers, but it'll probably still be considered a seller's market, only because a lot of sellers aren't going to be prepared to sell.
One final question for you. You mentioned it earlier, and I think that's the reason why you started this, that veterans are really good candidates to do ETAs, right? You mentioned human capital, and I think you touched on process. But for anyone who's watching or who's here and contemplating if this is something they can do, can you tell me why you think that veterans are uniquely qualified to do an ETA and run a business successfully?
I mean, I have a bit of a bias myself, so I'm the son and grandson 2 times over of veterans who were business buyers and then business owners. My dad had an exit. My one grandfather had an exit, and then my other grandfather had an exit, sold it to his own family. Post World War II, almost 50% of the businesses in the United States were run by veterans. Right now, it's less than 5. If you look at it, it's not, I wouldn't say it's causation, but it's correlation between the number of people who join the military who don't have a family history of entrepreneurship, whose families come from a W-2 environment, and therefore the likelihood that a veteran is even considering entrepreneurship is generally pretty low, because you have a bias to doing it if you've seen someone else do it. So this is part of us trying to break into that and be able to say, hey, look, you have the capability to do it. If you look at when veterans have either been general managers of companies or they've run a P&L for like a private equity firm, those businesses are always more profitable. And sometimes like I think the industry standard is they're 4% above average for being able to return profit to a company when they're running it, whether that's as a CEO, president, or a COO. And it's because of the way that we think systematically. We approach problems in a curious way, typically. We're never satisfied with something being the way it is. We always want to improve, quote unquote, our foxhole. And we understand how to manage risk. And so what we talk about is that veterans are curious, committed to community, they are courageous, and they're coachable. So that's the other part. So the last part is that veterans do really well in business acquisition because they'll listen to the former owner. Because even though they may not do everything that the former owner did, they'll give them the respect of understanding that they've done it for a couple of decades. And they're not going to lean on the fact that they went to a good business school to say, hey, I learned all I needed to know at whatever business school, and I don't need to listen to this person. Because all of us who have served more than probably 2 years in the military have grown to accept the fact that someone has walked this line before us. And it's better for us to learn from them and adapt to what they've learned than to try to spend the same blood, sweat, and treasure as someone who did it before us.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Then, Alan, will you grab Teresa's back? Patrick, as a sign of our appreciation, I want to hand you a small token and also have Teresa come up, as your team with you. Thank you so much for being here today, squeezing us in. I know you weren't on your original schedule,
it's all right,
but I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And Teresa,
I feel honored. Thank you.
as always, thank you.
Yeah, thanks on behalf of Orders and Honor as well. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's go.
Oh, I definitely wasn't looking at that camera. Can we do that again?
Let's do it again. Let's do it again.
100% was looking over here still.
Okay, and then we will be back at 11 a.m.